Good evening. Welcome to our celebration of poetry at RCC. Our special guest is North Carolina Poet Laureate Joseph Bathanti, but before he takes the stage, a couple of things that I want to tell you about. The first is that every year, the Rockingham County Public Library System sponsors a poetry contest for middle school and high school students. And this is the second year that I have had the privilege of judging those contests. And I can tell you that poetry is alive and well in Rockingham County. We're going to be just fine. I think some of our winners are with us, so I would like to recognize those winners. If you'll stand when I call your name, we'll applaud when all the names are called. For the poem submitted to the Reedsville Library, the middle school level, first place, Fatima Muhammad. Second place, Jose Antonio Rojas. At the high school level, Christina Ogletree. And second place, Elizabeth Robertson. We'll give them a round of applause. Thank you. The poem submitted to the Eden Library, middle school level, first place, Cody Mader. At the high school level, first place, Tara Johnson. Second place, Alex Vila. And honorable mention, Valerie Mazzola. Congratulations. The poem submitted to the Western Libraries branch, the middle school level, first place, Miguel Cruz Parrish, Amelia Thompson. Second place, Amelia Thompson. Honorable mention, Liam Donnelly. At the high school level, first place, Deanna Martin. Second place, Hannah Hartman. And honorable mention, Tiffany Thomas. Congratulations. Those poems are on display at the Reedsville Public Library, so if you want to check them out, as I said, we're in good shape. To those of students who are here, keep writing. Always write and submit. All right. Our special guest is, again, our state poet, Joseph Bathanti, native of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, came to North Carolina as a VISTA volunteer in 1976, I believe. He's been the Poet Laureate since 2012. And the only thing I want to say, because I want him to have as much time as possible by way of introduction, I was telling somebody that he was coming here tonight, and they said, he's such a sweet man. He's a kind, thoughtful soul, and his poetry is a really fair representation of the rich tradition that we have in North Carolina of literature. I think you'll enjoy. He does have books for sale. He's welcome, wants you to sign them. So if you'll stick around and talk and buy books so he can sign them. Joseph Bathanti, thank you very much.
Thank you, Hannah. I don't know what to think about being characterized as a sweet man. You know, I feel almost like a grandfather, but I'm not. So I'll try and be sweet. Thank you all for coming. This is National Poetry Month, and it sounds like poetry is really thriving in Rockingham County. I think this is maybe the fourth or even fifth time I've come to this school, and I always love coming here. You have such a beautiful place where you live. Who are the baseball players in here? Stand up, baseball players, get up. Come on, get off the bench. Okay. Thank you for being here. I know that Ms. Sykes subverted baseball practice so you could be here. So in honor of the baseball players, and because this is April, which is and you guys can sit down. I'm not going to punish you by making you stand the whole time. Because April is not only Poetry Month, it is also the month in which the baseball season kicks off. I grew up playing a lot of baseball. In fact, I wanted to be a professional baseball player for a long time, and that didn't work out. Like a lot of people, I couldn't hit really. You know, you get to a point in your baseball career, you know, I played through high school, but then the pitching, as you guys know, gets better and better and better, and that's sometimes what ends up being the dividing line. So in honor of baseball, in honor of poetry, And this is also National Jazz Month, and in honor of all those ball players back there, I'm going to read a number of baseball poems to start out with. Who likes baseball in the room? Because it would be terrible if there were only like 7 people that liked it. Again, I grew up in Pittsburgh, and I think I saw more baseball games at Old Forbes Field and then Three Rivers than any kid. My dad just took me to ball games all the time. And I come from the era, the Roberto Clemente. Do you guys know do people know who Roberto Clemente is? Folks know who Clemente is? And Bill Mazeroski, who hit the famous 1960 home run to beat the Yankees in the '60 World Series, and Willie Stargell, people like that. So I grew up, and I saw a lot of good ball players. I'm going to have to use a bit of profanity in the first poem, and I'll try not to repeat it too many times. The first poem is called, and I do see there's some children in the audience, but the poem is called Son of a Bitch. When you're a kid, you know that there are words that you shouldn't say. We called them bad words. So you knew you couldn't say them, but you certainly didn't want to ask what they meant either. You just didn't say them. So this first poem is about playing Little League. My dad was my Little League coach. He was the nicest man in the world. I had a lovely father. The assistant coach's name was Al Petro, and he was a scoundrel. His kid was on the team too, and his kid was a lousy ball player, but he belittled the child in front of all of us, and we disliked him intensely. And I heard the other coaches calling him that title of the poem because of that. So to all of you who love sports, you could have kids who don't love sports, and I've coached all of my kids in Little League. If they don't want to be out on the field, let them stay home. Johnny Petro's dad, Al, was a son of a bitch. His fellow coaches, including my father, had no use for him. Excluded, red-faced. He looked like Lee Harvey Oswald. Get in front of it, Al commanded, forbidding Johnny to flinch as he clubbed them vicious grounders with his big Hillerick and Bradsby .35, a cigarette stealing out of his mouth like a bullet, the ball tearing rapid along the mined field. Take it in your chest. What are you afraid of? My father had known Al for years, but said little aside from the times often enough when Al crucified Johnny because of a boot or strikeout. My dad would tell him to let up, and Al would wheel menacingly, then smile when he saw who it was. I thought it took something secret to brand a man son of a bitch. Murder or sins of impurity, more than baseball, more than fathering a boy who couldn't catch, had no arm, no swing, a boy smart enough, too smart, Al would mutter, to realize there was no future in 1963 on that glassy, pocked field down on Larmer Avenue. Are you a statue? Al would bellow in the middle of an inning when a ball shot by Johnny, then mimic his son, standing motionless, head hanging, arms drooped at his sides, the two of them identical, still as marble, except for the boy's squint behind his glasses. This next poem is called Washing Her Ruined Boy. It's the first poem I ever wrote in the voice of a woman, and it's really about a little boy who comes home from playing a Little League game. He's 7 years old. He has lost the game, and he feels like the world has ended. We all have that feeling, and little kids, as we know, live and die every day. And I think it's interesting, too, that a woman is narrating this poem, is the speaker in the poem, because sometimes little boys will not betray their feelings to their fathers in the same ways that they will to their mother. I have 2 boys, and it's kind of like that, too. And I would allow myself to be vulnerable in front of my mother in ways I never would in front of my father, because there is that maybe outmoded code that, boys are supposed to be tough, and you never want your dad to see you not tough, even though they understand. Washing her ruined boy. That he would not cry this way in front of his father is no measure of greater love. He simply apportions me what is mine. As I run his bath, I watch him through the mirror, Yankees piped gravely across his chest in maroon block as he undresses. He's smooth and pretty as his sister, but unlike her, he covets fame's witness. I can hardly lift him over the lip of the tub where his regatta lists, dry-docked and forgotten. Tonight he does not buck my cleansing hand, but leans into it, crying as I bathe him, still not sure what he's assailed by as loss, for what is there to lose in 7 years? Already he's bent on making this morning his life. Each night he prays to be a champion. I yearn to tell him he is right to despair, as I towel and wrap him, languid, weeping across my knees, wondering if tonight he'll cry out and sleep as he kicks that same elusive grounder through his dreams, the one he's told me over and over, incredulous that something bad could happen, that had all the world to choose, yet chose the earth he stood on to pluck off and ruin him. So I ramble around the state talking about poetry, doing readings, doing workshops, and people always think that poetry is about this kind of stuff, feelings, ethereal stuff, abstraction. And I've been telling people to use their own language and write poetry like they're talking across the kitchen table, or how they might talk to each other sitting on the bench in between innings, in that they can write about baseball, and they can write about football, and they can write about sports, and they can write about where they live. They can write about cooking and gardening, that it's just not about abstraction. This next poem is called October. And it's about Joe DiMaggio. Everybody knows who Joe DiMaggio is, right? Because if you don't, well, you're in trouble. Waiting for the 7:10 Bronx Express, a man finds a 1941 baseball card of Joe DiMaggio in his top coat lining, causing him to weep all day at his desk. His wife wakes alone, watching Niagara on the $1 Million Movie. She undresses and hugs herself between freezing sheets, remembering tiny mouths of blue milk that blessed and emptied the last summer before the war. The man drags home, spurred like the quiet clipper, after fighting a World Series crowd, and finds his wife painting her nails in the bay window, hair still blonde as boned ash. He knows the grace it takes to hit in 56 straight, to be more than a ball player. I wanted it to go on forever, DiMaggio once said wistfully of the streak, as though it had not gone far enough in jolting epiphany. Seeing her husband's silver hair and Sicilian jaw, the woman too knows they are commemorative of doomed love, whispering beneath the onslaught of autumn brilliance, nothing is ever lost or forgotten. And I have a poem called The Babe Ruth Story. In 1948, I was born in 1953, so this movie was made before I was born, called The Babe Ruth Story, and it starred William Bendix, an old star who starred in a pretty popular television series called The Life of Riley. He was also in Alfred Hitchcock's Lifeboat with Tallulah Bankhead, a really scary movie, I might add. Anyhow, I think when I was in first grade, and I went to all Catholic high schools. In fact, Professor Conti and I grew up in the same neighborhood and went to the same same high school, and grew up very Italian in a very Italian section. I went to a Catholic school and was taught by nuns, vicious nuns, I might add. But occasionally they would do nice things, very, very occasionally, I might add. And one of the things that they would do is they would sometimes show us movies in the school kind of lunchroom. So they showed us the Babe Ruth story when I was in first grade, and William Bendix played Babe Ruth. And I was already in love with baseball, and the story just utterly broke my heart. The Babe Ruth story. And it has a little epigraph. An epigraph's like just kind of a little explanatory note, sometimes called a head note, as a kind of gloss. And this is from Robert Creamer's biography of Babe Ruth called The Babe, which is a great book. And it says, "The last rites of the Catholic Church were administered on July 21st, but Babe rallied again after that. He left the hospital on the evening of July 26th to attend the premiere of the Babe Ruth story. He was this print is so small I can barely read it. He was very uncomfortable during the film and left before it was over." A hand-fed 16 millimeter sprayed black and white the school cellar wall, a nun caressing a flashlight on the periphery of the dust-flecked film beam. I kept at home above my bed a poster of the real Babe Ruth, pinstriped, throned, with his Yankee crown and the enormous bat thrown slant like a scepter at his shoulder. He looked nothing like William Bendix, who played the Babe, like the Life of Riley, a dear, sheepish lug who with 4 pounds of ash and horsehide dreamt himself, then gave his life away. Crouched in my metal chair beneath the soft cathode ray, feeling on my lips the breast-like give of the marshmallows I ate, and on my tongue their cloying, I was happy. Only a good beating could make me cry. So while I'm on the subject of Babe Ruth, I'm going to read another poem that invokes Babe Ruth, but there's a story behind this. When my son, who's getting ready to graduate from UNCA in May, and is a good baseball player, and I coached him, and he's fanatical about it, and he played it and played it and played it when he was little. That's all we did. So he was 6 years old, and he decided he was in a batting slump. Okay, a 6-year-old in a batting slump. And he was just beside himself about this. How is he going to get his stroke back? How is he going to be able to hit the ball again? So my wife was cooking something in the kitchen, and the cookbook was open. And in the cookbook, there was kind of a caricatured, cartoonish picture of Babe Ruth in his classic pose. And instead of having a few bats over his shoulder, he had scallions, onions, okay? And then there was a little story, and my kid was old enough to read, and the story was, and this is apparently true, but it might just be superstition, that when Babe Ruth was in a batting slump, and you guys know how superstitious athletes, especially baseball players, are, when Babe Ruth was in a batting slump, he would eat scallions to cure the batting slump. So my son, 6 years old, and kids hate onions, decides he's going to start eating raw onions to cure his batting slump. And this is the poem about it. It's called Drought, and it's also set during a time when water was being rationed. We were living in Statesville in Iredell County at the time, and there was a really significant drought. So you weren't allowed to wash your car, water your lawn, etc. And the corn, you know how the corn sometimes gets late in the summer. It was just dying. So I use this as a big metaphor here. And it's for my son, Beckett. A batting slump leaguers my 6-year-old. Balls from his bat, which rung off our tin roof, nest in the brown, withered June grass. Green onions, the only tenuous green between the sun and the water table, 16 inches to the bad and falling. Scarecrow farmers maundering among clicking kernels of dead wheat. Strike after futile strike, he implores I pitch, when it's obvious it will have to come back on its own. Like Elias, summoning rain, he flails the 27-inch silver Adirondack like a wroth prophet's sword until he can no longer lift his arms, parsing through the neurotic ticks of the hexed hitter, adjusting his stance, swapping bats, crossing himself, pawing with his bare toes at the cracked earth. Long past dusk, the ball graying in the falling night, after I have gone in to draw his ration bath, he drills, fearful that hitting, like God, is simply random, one day a blessing, the next a curse. From an open cookbook, he learns Babe Ruth ate scallions to cure slumps. There's a caricature of the Bambino in pinstripes swinging a giant scallion in the on-deck circle. I explain they are onions, which he abhors from the lily family, that the Egyptians believed they symbolized the world. His first bite leaves him paralyzed, catatonic, the dusty face beneath the hat bill suddenly old and drained. Each meal he eats them, tears washing his cheeks as he gnashes, then out to the yard. Still no rain, the waxing moon so bright it is a sound lording above the grizzled ground off which he grazes like a baby satyr on wild onions. The night of the solstice, I hear from my bed the telltale thunder of a ball launched off a bat, an instant before rain pellets down on the roof, then the relentless whoosh as water resounds, an endless ovation. Slowly the land upon which my cured son stands opens, so very, very slowly to the sky at last, its sealed lips. So we just passed Easter, and what precedes Easter, the resurrection, is Lent. In last year, I had a book come out called Sonnets of the Cross. It actually came out on Ash Wednesday. And there are 14 sonnets, 14 Elizabethan or Shakespearean sonnets, based on the 14 stations of the cross. Does everybody know what the stations of the cross are? If not, it's the 14 sort of episodes in Jesus' life from the time he's condemned to the point that he's actually taken off the cross. And there was it was a pilgrimage that medieval Christians would do. They would actually go to the Holy Land and walk the path that Jesus walked on his way to Calvary to be crucified. In Catholic churches especially have the 14 stations around the nave of the church. And they're usually very beautiful pieces of art. So I wrote 14 poems, very unconventional, although not blasphemy at all, but very unconventional about it. And I always figured if Jesus played a sport, he'd play baseball. So, I mean, don't you think that makes sense? This is the second poem in the series. It's called Jesus Carries His Cross, which is the second station. April, baseball has finally begun. I fire a wall. Let me start again. April, baseball has begun. I fire a ball off a wall for glory, each catch an indulgence like a home run whittling down my stretch in purgatory. A muff like sin fetches me, more burning. Like everything else, baseball is God's game. Every spring, his only son dies yearning in the new green grass. Not so much for fame, though like other sacrificials, Gehrig, Clementi, Hausman's rookie boy athlete, he lives immortal in our dreams, wearing his resurrection flannels through the street, 33 stitched in blood on his jersey, playing for one more season of mercy. And then I'll read one more baseball piece. Are you all sick of baseball pieces? I hope not. The season's just begun. Okay, when I was a kid in Pittsburgh, I had two favorite players. Of course, Roberto Clemente, who's, for my money, the greatest player of all time, period. And then also, I loved Bill Mazeroski a lot. So in 1960, I won't get into this because I'm going to read about this. Bill Mazeroski hit the only walk-off homer in the history of the World Series. It was kind of the lowly Pirates played the regal New York Yankees, Mickey Mantle, Roger Maris, Yogi Berra, Ralph Terry, Whitey Ford, Elston Howard, you name it, you name it. So it came down to the ninth inning of the seventh game. It was tied 9-9, the bottom of the ninth, okay? Bill Mazeroski hit a 1-0 pitch over the left field scoreboard to win the game, to win the series. And the city went berserk. And I have measured the rest of my life by that moment. I don't know that I've ever been so thrilled or out of my mind since. I was just a little boy. I was 7. And that's one of the other nice things, the only other nice thing I can remember the nuns doing. Towards the end of the game, in the 8th inning, they told us to run home as fast as we could, and maybe we could catch the end of the game. So I sprinted home and was able to just make it into the couch to see Maz park that homer into Shenley Park. I tell you all this because my father, and I told you what a lovely man my dad was, my dad, till his dying day, insisted that he and I were at the game. Okay? Now, I'm fascinated by that because, as you know, people often have duplicate stories of the same event. You can ask somebody what happened yesterday, they were all there, and they'd have 4 different versions. I know that I was not at that game, but my father also believed with all his heart, for some reason, that we were at that game. And my dad wasn't a storyteller, you know, not an exaggerator. And not only did he say we were at the game, but he said that I, upon the occasion of that home run pitch, rose just before Terry threw it and addressed all 36,000 folks in the stadium who must have all hushed and listened to me. I said Bill Mazeroski's going to hit the second pitch for a home run. A really sweet story. And I almost like to believe that really happened because it's so much better than what I know to happen. So this is just a few pages from my novel. It's a novel called East Liberty. It's where Professor Connie and I grew up, the very neighborhood. And it's narrated by a kid who is imagining himself at that game. Imagining himself at that game. My favorite baseball player is Bill Mazeroski, the Pirates' second baseman. William Stanley Mazeroski, of Polish Catholic ancestry, son of a West Virginia coal miner. Not a big guy, but strong, regular-looking, though on my favorite baseball card of him from the 1961 Topps Series, which I have enshrined in my head as his official portrait, he models movie star good looks, Montgomery Clift. His beautiful wife's name is Mylene. He wears number 9. His nickname is No Touch because on his double play pivot, his reception from the shortstop and relay to the first baseman is so seamless that he creates the optical illusion of never having touched the ball. He bats 8th and is really a humble guy who never gets credit for how revolutionary he is. In 1958, he hit 19 homers, and he hit the home run in the bottom of the 9th in the 7th game of the 1960 World Series that beat the unbeatable New York Yankees. I copy every move and gesture of his. Keep a wad of bubble gum in my cheek for tobacco when I'm playing. Magic marker 9s on the backs of my T-shirts. And even though Francine, my mother, wants me to take for confirmation the name of Nano, my first choice is Stanley after Maz. I figure that if Jesus had played baseball, he would have batted 8th and played second base. In the fall of 1960, even the nuns, along with all the little Catholic children like me, wear Kennedy buttons. It is a strange autumn, along with the fear that if a papist is elected president, the pontiff will move into the White House. There is a plague of suicidal squirrels. They fall out of trees, and as they scurry along electrical wires, inexplicably tumble to the pavement. They throw themselves under automobile tires. Dead animal collection works overtime. But nothing is stranger than the fact that the Pittsburgh Pirates compete in a World Series for the first time since 1927. On Thursday, October 13th, 1960, I have to step over dozens of dead squirrels, smashed and bloody, as I walk 4.5 miles to make it to Forbes Field in time for Maz's at bat in the bottom of the 9th of the 7th game of the World Series. After kneeling and kissing the plinth on which the statue of Honus Wagner stands just beyond the left field wall, I walk for the first time in my life into Forbes Field from the Senate Street entrance, right up the ramp on the third base side, down to the rail, and stand there staring at the expanse of green like no other green I have ever seen, the blonde infield dirt like no other dirt, the bases lovely and white, the distant green and ivy-colored walls, and the flag lifting and falling, the players, icon-like and mendicant in their beautiful uniforms, move in slow motion. The score is 9-9. Ralph Terry, number 32, is the Yankees' 5th pitcher of the day. Afflicted by uncharacteristic insomnia, he hadn't slept at all the night before, but had left the William Penn Hotel to wander the abandoned downtown streets of Pittsburgh, eating hamburgers at the White Tower, and finally ending his night with a ride on the Duquesne Incline. Standing on an observation deck on Mount Washington, he had watched the sun come up on the Golden Triangle, the 3 great rivers coming omnisciently together. The top of the Gulf building glowed red, predicting a warm, fair day for the decisive 105 game. Later that day, he was thankful he would not have to pitch. Maz gets off his knee in the on-deck circle, stumps to the plate, bends and scoops a handful of dirt to rub on his bat handle, ships his tobacco cud from one cheek to the other, and spits. He feels rested. The evening before, after oiling his glove and tightening a few seams, he had a bowl of cornflakes and then slept peacefully all night next to Mylene. He's not the superstitious type, but he said a rosary on his way to the park. The first pitch is a high slider that gets away from Terry. For a moment, he has a vision of Maz hitting it out, but he lays off it, and the ump calls it a ball. Maz peers out at Terry, whose face is nimbused by the late afternoon sun. The pin of the Kennedy button Mazeroski wears beneath his flannel pricks him. He is about to motion for time when Terry goes into his windup. Maz expects a breaking ball. The pitch sails in, just under the letters, a tad inside. He waits and waits for the ball to break, but it never does. Terry tries to call the pitch back, but all he really desires is sleep. Johnny Blanchard, the Yankee catcher, attempts like a magician to make the pitch disappear into his mitt, but Maz, at the last second, swings and hits it. The ball, directly above Cletus Boyer's head at shortstop, is barely out of the infield when Yogi Berra, in left field, flicks down his sunglasses, takes a quarter turn to his left, and then freezes. He hears church bells ringing all over Pittsburgh. The monstrous square Longines clock sitting atop the green scoreboard in left stalls forever at 3:36:30. The 3 pigeons roosting on it never move, yet very visibly turn their heads in unison to watch the ball clear the wall, bounce into the open window of an abandoned, stolen Nash in Shenley Park, which is later towed to a Swissvale junkyard and pancaked. Bill Mazeroski is 24 years old, like a holy man. I have all along known what was going to happen. But the truth is, the real truth, if there is such a thing, is that I am not there at all. I witnessed Maz hit that homer, but not while standing along the third base line at Forbes Field. I've never been to Forbes Field. I run all the way home from school and get there just in time to see it on television. The city goes berserk. People stay up all night singing and dancing under a sky raining paper and confetti that piles like snowdrifts and blocks traffic in and out of the city. Well past midnight, standing with Francine on the corner of Penn and Highland, watching people beat on pots and pans and set off cherry bombs. I've never seen such unadulterated bliss. Yet as time goes on, I begin for some reason insisting I am one of the 36,633 privileged citizens who had seen in person Maz's homer. It is a lie I tell to myself first and then to others. And I'm sure they know I'm lying, but indulge me nonetheless. Not only do I begin to believe it, but to invest it with a mythos that sometimes gets the better of me. I make up stories about it, like a hallucination. For days and days, the newspapers fill with World Series stories and photographs. Maz becomes, for a little while, more important than Jesus and Kennedy combined. One of the classic pictures published again and again and overnight hung like an icon in black and white on walls all over Pittsburgh is of Maz prancing down the third base line on his way to the plate after the homer. His right arm is up in the air, in his left, his hard hat held out in front of him. Waiting for him is a mob of other pirates, and at the fringe of the image of the crowd stampedes out of the stands. Running maybe 2 yards behind him is a boy. His likeness is captured flawlessly, wearing a navy blazer with the emblem of Saints Peter and Paul on the breast pocket, a white shirt and navy tie. His hair is combed back beneath the white walls. The ears are jugged, the eyes and heavy brow dark. In a full-out sprint, he seems breathless, his hand reaching out, as if all he wants is to touch Mazeroski. Indisputably, that little boy is me, my face, my clothes, my outstretched hand. I imagine this not only the most perfect moment in Maz's life, but the most perfect moment in my life too. But I wasn't there. We invent ourselves, and like Mickey says, it's all about art. What I wish for more than anything else is to have Bill Mazeroski for my father, for Mylene to be my mother, to join that perfect family I see pictures of every year in the Pirates yearbook. In late winter, I would accompany my family to Fort Myers for spring training. Then until the weather chilled again, I'd travel the country watching my father play second base like no other man has ever done. In front of all of Pittsburgh, I would step into the Forbes Field infield wearing hometown black and gold flannels and play in the Pirates' annual father-son game. Every year, I'd see myself beaming in the yearbook, an arm curled around my adoring mother's waist, my smiling, immortal father's hand tousling my hair. Okay, that's baseball for tonight. So now I'm going to move into football. No, I really could. And then I could move into basketball and then track and wrestling too, but I won't do that. I've written a whole lot about sports, but I've written about a whole lot of other things too. I'm going to end with maybe 3 more poems, and then I'll take questions as long as anybody has questions. I had a new book of poems come out November 1st, it's called Concertina. And Concertina is an Italian squeeze box, but it's also that awful wire that you see on top of prison walls and sometimes used for ramparts in the military too. I came to North Carolina in 1976. I'd just gotten out of graduate school in Pittsburgh, and I didn't know clearly what I wanted to do, but I had a really long list of things I couldn't stomach the thought of doing. So I applied to be a VISTA volunteer, which was Domestic Peace Corps, and I was assigned just by random to the North Carolina Department of Correction. So I worked for 12 months in a prison in Huntersville, North Carolina, which is just north of Charlotte. And then it's almost 38 years now since I came. I go in and out of prisons often to teach creative writing workshops. So this book is basically pretty biographical, and it's all about prison. And incidentally, my wife was assigned to the same project. She's from Georgia, and that's where I met her. So I kind of met my wife in prison, and we've been married ever since. So it's an excellent formula for love. This is called Sweet Random. All of the VISTA volunteers who were assigned to this project from all over the country, for the first week or so, we lived with our VISTA boss in his teeny tiny apartment in Charlotte until we could find our own place. And that's really where my relationship with my wife kind of got some traction. That first week on the project, this poem was called Sweet Random. That first week on the project, the four of us new Vistas crashed at our boss's cramped flat. A Jewish girl from Bayonne, a Cuban whose preacher father was locked in Castro's Havana jail, a girl from Atlanta, and I, a Catholic from Pittsburgh. Crammed together as we were, hot as fire, no air conditioning. At night, we drank outside, smoldering, as if on the brink of raising every prison in North Carolina. One day, after a long, fruitless search for my own place, the Atlanta girl, Joan Carey, emerged from the tiny bathroom wrapped in a towel, chestnut hair pinned atop her head into the full early evening sun blazing through the windows. The towel, buttery gold with wheat stalks and full blonde raiment, clouds of pale chaff and the pollinated light of what would be another long, sultry August night in Charlotte. She and I, up to that point, had been friendly, even circumspectly affectionate, dazed by the sight of her in nothing but a towel, the sun stealing over us. I knew little of her, perhaps less of myself, purely nothing of the lives of caged men. I envisioned prison as purgatory, a colossal furnace hoarding chits on me above. Also, help me, God, I felt blessed by those shackled men pulling my time in the forge. Forsaking home for toil among convicts, it had been rectitude I desired, an apparition bare in reckoning is an angel with a flaming sword. Ahead of me beckoned sweet random. All night I held it seared against me. This next is called The Wall. One of the very first things that we did, or they did to us, is they took us on a tour of Central Prison and Women's Prison and a number of really powerful, big, scary institutions in Raleigh. And when we went to Central Prison, they took us through the block for the criminally insane, and they also took us on death row and also into the death house, too, where the gas chamber was, when the gas chamber was still there. The Wall. Joan and I were in Raleigh together for the first time to take the tour for New Vista volunteers at North Carolina Central Prison. 100 years old, built by convict labor along the railroad tracks behind Morgan Street so new felons could be shipped in by boxcar. The inmates called it the Wall. 1,300 of them locked down, guards with Tommy guns manned the towers 24 hours. The fences that crowned the high stone perimeter was electrified. We were marched right into the gut of it, I and Jay blocks where the criminally insane played badminton on an asphalt court wrapped in glittering silver concertina and screamed obscenities at the girls. A wall with bullet holes in it, no buttons in the elevators, just an intercom and a camera. The death house, in a grassy side yard spilling with pink primrose, had to be entered through a heavy church door. Inside lurked the gas chamber, an oak chair bolted to the floor in a glass confessional, a row of red cushioned pews for the witnesses. Though mid-August, death row was cold, Joan wore my green flannel shirt, her long brown hair still damp from bathing. I had known her only a week. In college, she'd played piano for prisoners at the DeKalb County Jail in Atlanta. The central condemned wore white beltless trousers, white tucked-in shirts. They were barefoot, washed in light. We filed past their cells along a narrow gunmetal catwalk hung over an abyss. We couldn't see bottom. As Joan queued along the tier, her head was down. The men milled to the fronts of their cells and clenched the bars, mere likenesses of one another, amnesiacs, ghostly in their whites. That odd gleam pooled about them, not wholly there, but evanescent, while we hovered, trying not to face them in midair. In the last poem I'll read is called Certainty, and I just have to tell you a little story about it. It's about going to a party one hot August night, and my wife Joan and I went. We weren't married then. And we went with this guy named Jim Plumley, who grew up in Philadelphia. He was our Vista boss. And we went in his Honda. In 1976, Hondas were about this big. I mean, they were these teeny-weeny little cars. So we parked it on the street. We went to the party. We were in the party for, I don't know, hours and hours and hours. And when we came out of the party, this is on 8th Street in Charlotte, the car was rolling down the street. Certainty. Far from home, penniless, food stamps, everything from goodwill. I live with Joan Carey, a Baptist girl from Tucker, Georgia. For $80, we leased a Charlotte attic across from Detox and Memorial Stadium and worked in the prisons. My family in Pittsburgh wondered what I was doing for no wage and why, all the way down in North Carolina like some agitator. The certainty I lived in then made me happier than I've ever been. One torrid August night, 3 a.m., we barged out of a party at the Weavers. Joan and I and Jim, our Vista boss. We had come in Jim's tiny Honda, brown, homely, tires the size of saucers. We were headed for Krispy Kreme up on Independence, the hot donuts now neon about to announce yet another epiphany in that enchanted tropical August. Joan was 20, sundresses I remember like pets from my childhood, and Jim, so young and confident. Inside, they danced to Thelma Houston's Don't Leave Me This Way, setting fire to Hallelujah, the last sacrifice of summer. Hearts and windows shattered across the Queen City. Glad to be together, we stepped into the street toward the car. The night was far from over, yet up in the huge magnolias early morning cast its thermal hush upon the revel. The three of us saw it at the same time. Jim's Honda, somehow detached from its station at the curb, rolled down the middle of 8th Street. An automobile, inexplicably animated with sinister purpose, as if we'd tripped unwittingly through the scrim segregating us from that other world where things happen for no reason at all. Jim and I intercepted it, backpedaling as it bulled us toward the intersection until we finally halted it inches from catastrophe. We looked at one another and laughed, the way convicts ambling Huntersville Yard laughed about building 30, 40 years in the penitentiary. Guys my age who wouldn't see the streets again until after the sons Joan and I would one day parent had grown into men and left home. The laugh Joan and I exchange all too often when the unimaginable hurtles into an otherwise placid day. The laugh I think of now is fear. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot. What a fabulous audience. I'm delighted to take questions if you're still speaking to me. How'd you baseball players like that baseball stuff? That was pretty good, right? Thank you. I appreciate what you're doing. Hang in there. Stay in front of it. Anybody? Okay, well, thanks so much for coming. Oh, a question? Okay. Hayes. Is the Pope Italian? And it was a long time before I could say that, too, because we had like a German Pope and a Polish Pope. But yeah, you can't even enter the precincts of Pittsburgh, much less be born and raised there, without loving the Steelers. It's a must. If I can brag a little, too, I played on the same football team as the Steelers' current special teams coach, Danny Smith, who's a friend of mine. So I do love the Steelers. And Dan Marino, the Dolphins quarterback, went to my high school. It's a big story, yeah. Yeah, I love all those teams. Got a boy. Anybody else? That was the best question I could have possibly got. And from the best person, too. Thank you for having me.